New Orleans Mayor, that's Mitch Landrieu, is opening up about his decision to remove 4 Confederate monuments from his city. Mayor Landrieu recently took 60 Minutes to a shed where the statues of Generals Robert E. Lee and P.G.T. Beauregard now stand. The Democrat also removed statues last year of Confederate President Jefferson Davis in the Battle of Liberty Place monument. That statue commemorated an attempt by white supremacists to overthrow the city's integrated government after the Civil War. Mayor Landrieu discusses a path he took toward removing the monuments in his new book, In the Shadow of Statues, A White Southerner Confronts History. Mayor Landrieu joins us at the table. Hello, White Southerner.
Good morning. How are you?
I was so moved by your book, Mayor. I have to say, I was very moved by it. There were so many things in it I didn't know and didn't really think about until I was reading your book. But this all started from a conversation with Wynton Marsalis, who's an old friend of yours.
It did. The context was, of course, you know, the city was destroyed by Katrina, and thank the rest of Americans for helping to stand back up. But as we were building the city back and reconstructing it, the mantra was, don't put it back like it was, put it back the way it should have been if we would have gotten it right the first time. And so as we began to prepare for our 300th anniversary, which is in a couple of weeks, by the way, I asked Wynton to help me, and he said, well, I'll help you. He said, but you really ought to think about taking down the Robert E. Lee statue. And I said, well, why would I do that? And he said, well, have you ever thought about who put it there or why it's there or what impact it has on people like me? And then the next thing he said really just exploded in my brain, which was that, you know, Louis Armstrong left here and didn't want to come back because of that statue. And when he said that, the notion of the great diaspora, 5 million African Americans who fled the South after the Civil War, and really just troubled me greatly. And I told him that I would look into it, and I did.
And you did. Put it in context about what it means, though, why it is so painful.
Well, when you see it from Wynton's eyes, or you see it from the eyes of a young African-American girl in a city that's 60% African-American, those monuments were put up by people for a reason, which was to send a message that, notwithstanding the fact that the Confederacy lost the war, that idea was still in the control of the South. And much like Jim Crow law, just much like separate but equal, much like the laws that prohibited African-Americans from following whites in a car on the highway and passing them, these statutes were put up well after the Civil War for the specific purpose of revering the Confederacy, which, of course, you know, was designed to destroy the nation over the cause of slavery.
And the reaction when you did this was you couldn't find a crane, among other things.
Well, it was a very emotional reaction. We had a number of long debates and public hearings in the city council, court races, but after the decision was made legally to take them down, even a powerful mayor of a city that was rebuilding the entire city, airports, riverfronts, schools, I couldn't find anybody to give me a crane. And I couldn't find a crane operator, which really began to introduce me into the concept of institutional racism and what that really meant. That you could have the law on your side, but if you didn't have the levers of power or the money or the equipment, you were basically screwed. Forgive the language, but you couldn't get anything done. And that story came back to me powerfully because I've heard that from a lot of my friends for many years, over a long time.
In the book, you mentioned race, and you say, here's what I know about race. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You can't go around it. You have to go through it. That's a difficult thing to do.
Well, it's very hard, and of course, Dr. King has kind of showed us the way, but there are people who are still with us who I consider to be saints, like John Lewis, who, as you may recall, and I talk about this in the book, was standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and he knew he was about to get hit by that sheriff, and he never moved. And he's walked us through this difficult path because we really don't know how to talk about it in the country. It's very uncomfortable. And the point that I'm making in the book is based on my experience. It's very hard, but you have to talk about it, and you have to walk through it. We have to give each other a lot of room. And the book really is more of an invitation than it is a judgment or an accusation for people to see the world differently based on what the real history was.
So how do you have that conversation with people who who aren't giving you the crane? How do you have that conversation?
Well, you do it by taking down monuments. You do it by giving speeches. You do it by getting people around the table to actually say, can you see the world from our perspective? And so the book is about race, but writ large, it's about discrimination. It's about really getting back to what makes us really great Americans, which is judging people based on their behavior, not what they look like, where they come from, what their religion is, what the origin of their nation is, really on behavior. That's the idea of America, which makes us great.
But you said, Mayor, whenever you would waver, listen, you got death threats, you were threatened.
Yeah.
When it came to take the statues down, you had to have police escorts, sharpshooters wearing what do you call it, the bulletproof vest.
Yeah.
So they had to be totally covered. It was that dangerous. But you said whenever you wavered, you would think about 2 numbers, which I thought was interesting. What were those 2 numbers?
One of them was how many African Americans were enslaved, which is around 5 or 6 million, and the other is how many people were killed in the Civil War, with 600,000 plus more, and the sacrifice that they made. And by the way, I'm not the first one that ever tried this. There have been so many people that have had more difficult struggles than this that are too numerous to name right now, but you could go back.
But even your own dad told you not to do it.
Even my dad told me, well, he was afraid because he had been the mayor of the city of New Orleans. He knew what the issue of race was about. His life was threatened when he was 29 years old and I was in utero when he voted against the segregation package when Jimmy Davis and a lot of folks were around. So he knew that this was not a safe thing. Having said that, a lot of other people have made greater sacrifices than I will ever make to this particular cause. So when that happened, I just tried to remember the other people that had courage and just kind of kept walking, and a lot of people helped. This was a communal effort. This is not something clearly that I did by myself, or the first one to actually talk about it.
I love that you wanted to be an actor before a politician.
I absolutely did. I still do.
Some people say they're the same thing, Mayor.
Well, do we dare think Mitch Landrieu 2020?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
But thanks for
What does Moon think?
Moon's pretty sober about it all too. I mean, that's always a tough road.
All right, Mayor Landrieu. It's always good to see you. Always good to have you at the table.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
In the Shadow of Statues is on sale now wherever you like to buy your books.